Welcome to Money, 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 your weekly personal finance date with me, Surabhi Upadhyay. The Maharashtra Insurance Ombudsman has recently come out with an important order which can prove to be a shot in the arm for thousands of COVID patients whose claims were turned down by their health insurers because the treatment took place in home isolation and not at a hospital. Today on the show, we examine the nuances of this ruling and also talk about why it's important to get home treatment covered for diseases even beyond COVID-19. My guests are financial planning expert Harshvardhan Roongta, as well as Amit Chhabra, the head of the health insurance vertical at Policyholder. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for joining in. Now, this is very important, and Harsh, I'll start with you, and thank you for flagging this off for us and our viewers. Because I know of a lot of family members and friends who simply did not have any access to their insurance cover because treatment was taking place at home, either because of lack of beds or generally, everybody was being advised not to go to the hospitals unless they had very severe symptoms. So let's start this off. Tell us more about this Ombudsman ruling and what it means.
Well, Surabhi very rightly said, we all have people around us and we are aware of the fact that many were declined and rejected of their claims in case they had taken home isolation. So then let me just take one step back and explain the entire concept, what has happened. So first and foremost, if a person has been diagnosed positive of COVID, there are two things that he or she will do. One is, of course, if the symptoms are severe and he's been advised hospitalization, then of course you got yourself hospitalized and you underwent a particular treatment. And for mild symptoms, of mild cases, even the government was advising that do not burden the infrastructure, but opt for home isolation and get your treatment done at home. And whatever expenses that you incur, of course, were something that you were bearing for yourself. Now, all those people who had a standard Mediclaim policy. So a standard Mediclaim policy is something that you and me have bought since a couple of years. Now, these policies cover treatment and all the cost of treatment in case you're hospitalized for a minimum of 24 hours, except barring a few ailments which have been very categorically specified in the policy, like a cataract treatment, etc. You don't need a 24-hour hospitalization. However, if you are undergoing a treatment as home quarantine for COVID, and all the insurance companies have rejected this claim saying that home quarantine is not covered, except for Corona coverage, which we will possibly talk later on in the show. So if you're a policy holder with a standard Mediclaim policy, home quarantine expenses were not being paid. Mm-hmm. Now, what was peculiar in this second wave? What was very peculiar was that, hospital beds were not available, and it's a publicly known fact. It is not something that is not known to the insurance companies and happening only in a particular city or a town. It's a nationwide phenomena. Now, if you were even if you had severe symptoms and you were desiring to be hospitalized, you were not getting rooms and you were forced to get your treatment done at home in whatever manner you could manage. Now, if you filed your claim with the insurance company, they've simply rejected it, saying that, okay, you didn't have an hospitalization, so I'm sorry, we cannot pay the claim to you. Now, the interesting part about this Ombudsman order that we're talking about, it is a very recent order dated 27 July 2021. So it's very, very recent. And what this order goes on to say is that even in cases of home quarantine, because it's a pandemic kind of a situation, and the government had also requested not to burden the infrastructure if you did not require hospitalization, please undertake the treatment for home quarantine. So Insurance Ombudsman has in fact gone ahead and said all cases of being COVID positive, whether you were hospitalized or not, the claim should be payable by the insurance company, and the award has been given in favor of the insured. And this particular case being Mr. Rahul Ajmera versus Max Cooper General Insurance Company. Okay. So I think it's a very landmark judgment, impacting all of us and everybody listening right now.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to you with a lot more questions on the order, its applicability in just a minute. Let me also bring in Amit into the conversation. Amit, hi, good to have you on the show. First of all, what is the experience that you noticed, when it came to clients via Policyholder? As Harsh explained, a standard Mediclaim does require hospitalization. So has there been a lot of disappointment on this count because home treatment simply didn't get covered?
So let me just add a couple of nuances here. So home treatment, we can't make a blanket statement that home treatment is not covered. In fact, there is something called domiciliary hospitalization, which is a part of most health insurance policies. And let me explain the definition of that. So domiciliary hospitalization basically means that there was a requirement for hospitalization, but the patient could not be hospitalized because of one, either beds weren't available, which was a real scenario, specifically in the wave 2 during the April, May, June time period. Or if there is a problem where the patient cannot be transported to a hospital, which also is a possibility. In all of those cases, if there was a requirement for hospitalization, but the patient could not be hospitalized, then the treatment can actually happen at home, and it is covered under health insurance policies. So even the kind of policies that people have today, or they had even before COVID, this is actually not specific to COVID. This was always there. It's one of the features which people usually overlook because nobody ever thought that there would be a scenario that there won't be beds available in hospitals. But actually, in most comprehensive health insurance policies, domiciliary hospitalization is already covered. However, there are a couple of nuances here again, which I'll point out. The first thing that I said was there has to be a need for hospitalization. What that means is, so if let's say somebody has very minor COVID and there is no need for hospitalization and you're just being asked to quarantine at home so that you don't spread the infection, then there is no need for hospitalization, and then that is not covered under the standard terms and conditions of a health insurance policy. However, if let's say your oxygen levels were critical and there was a need for hospitalization, but you could not get a bed because beds were full, in those cases, we have had so many claims being paid by insurance companies because there was a requirement, but a bed wasn't available.
Okay.
So this feature called domiciliary hospitalization has always been a part of most comprehensive health insurance policies, and it is covered. In fact, as I said, during the pandemic time, we actually saw a lot of claims being paid out as well.
Okay.
And this covers for the cost of hospitalization, the cost of treatment, medicines, any diagnostic, etc. All of that does even now get covered under domiciliary.
So, this is an important point because I know that I never bothered checking my insurance policy for the fine print, whether domiciliary hospitalization is covered or not. I never did that before COVID. But after this pandemic, when I renewed my policy, I made sure that it was explicitly stated that home treatment gets covered. Which brings me to the next question now, Harsh. What is the applicability of this Ombudsman order? It's the Maharashtra Ombudsman, I think. So if someone does feel aggrieved in other states as well, in NCR or wherever else, can they cite this order and go back to their insurer? Then will the doctor's word be, as Amit explained, that it has to be a genuine case where, it wasn't a very mild case, but there was no hospital bed available. So only in those cases can a claim be refiled. What are the options before patients?
Yeah, well, Surbhi, so Amit is right when you say that there is a concept of domiciliary hospitalization, also known as home care. So either it will be under the category entitled home care or domiciliary hospitalization. So let me highlight this to you. While this clause has always been there, the insurance companies, in my experience and what we have, in fact, my own claim was rejected when I filed for domiciliary hospitalization, and then I had to make a representation again with my own insurance company. Now, let's understand this very clearly. So, insurance companies have rejected, specifying that this treatment could have been taken on an OPD basis, and the line of treatment is only oral medication. So, because of this, we're not paying home quarantine as well. Now, despite a doctor's note advising hospitalization, the insurance companies completely neglected that fact and conveniently rejected the claim. So coming to the point, well, yes, there is a case for domiciliary hospitalization in this case. Coming to the order and its implication. So as I said, the order in fact goes one step further to say that all the claims, whether hospitalized or not hospitalized, both have to be paid. And because it's a pandemic kind of a situation. So this opens up the door to not even look at those conditions, whether you genuinely required hospitalization or not. So this order does have a far-reaching implication. In fact, let's talk about jurisdiction. So, because this order has been given by the Insurance Ombudsman of Maharashtra, which also includes the Mumbai region. So technically speaking, anybody out of Mumbai in Maharashtra can definitely cite this order and go to the insurance ombudsman. However, in my very simple understanding, if there is an ombudsman of Maharashtra excluding Mumbai region given this order, I am reasonably sure that you will not have a case probably in somewhere in the south where you can go and apply and they would say, no, we hold another opinion. So most certainly, all the insured whose claims have been rejected for domiciliary hospitalization, under home quarantine, and etc., should most certainly approach the insurance company once again, refile the claim with the grievance cell of the insurance company, cite this order, take a copy of this order, and file it along with your application for claim, and ask the insurance company to reconsider the rejection that they have made. In case they still reject it, then most certainly you should approach the insurance ombudsman and make a case for yourself. And I'm very confident that all should be getting paid for their claims.
Okay.
And one point, you can file your claim with the insurance ombudsman up to 1 year from the last communication that you received. So in case your claim has been rejected in the last 1 year, most certainly you should make this representation.
Okay, so really, really important that if you do think you're aggrieved and you've not been sort of given fair treatment by your insurer, there is another way out now with this insurance ombudsman order. Before we talk about the wider concept of domiciliary treatment and coverage, Amit, I want to sort of quickly bring up this. I think we're just having a trouble reaching with Amit, but the Corona Kavach policy, and Harsh, you mentioned that standard Mediclaim, I think it was a grey area, what gets covered, what doesn't. But in the Corona Kavach policy, which is a standard plan, which was introduced by the regulator, their home treatment gets covered in any case, right? So just quickly jog our memory and tell us if there's any benefit in taking this Corona Kavach policy.
In the month of June 2020, IRDA had directed all the general insurance and health insurance companies very specifically to introduce a Corona-specific policy. So, which was the Corona Kavach. It's an indemnity policy wherein an insured can get hospitalized or take home treatment. Either way, this policy was covering all the expenses incurred by the insured, which included the non-medical expenses as well, such as the pulse oximeter, a thermometer, the PPE kits, which again the standard Mediclaim policy was not covering. So this is a very specific policy where an insured can take cover up to 5 lakh of rupees, and the tenure of the policy can be either 3.5 months, 6.5 months, or 9.5 months. So you take this policy, and if you are tested positive, whether you get hospitalized or you take treatment at home, all the expenses were covered in this policy. And of course, there's another fixed benefit policy, which was a Corona Kavach. I beg your pardon, it is Corona Raksha.
Okay, I think we're having slight trouble with the a bit of a trouble with the audio lines over there. But I think the point that's being made is that while the standard products, Corona Rakshak and Corona Kavach, they did anyway cover domiciliary treatment, with this ruling, the Maharashtra Ombudsman ruling, now even other insurance companies and other plans, standard Mediclaim, they will have to provide for home treatment when it comes to COVID-19. We'll take a break. On the other side, we expand the scope of this discussion. Why just COVID-19? Should you really look at a policy that comprehensively covers any treatment taken at home? We'll discuss this after the break. Welcome back. Here with us on Money, Money, Money. And this week we're talking about the kind of things you must keep in mind as you're perhaps looking at renewing your health insurance. The pandemic is still very much raging around us, and there's a lot of fear about the so-called third wave. So some lessons that we can perhaps keep in mind. Amit, you were making the point about domiciliary hospitalization, and you were saying how most comprehensive covers have it. But do they? I mean, I don't remember a lot of standard Mediclaim policies explicitly saying it. Though, as I said, I mean, when I renewed my policy, I opted for one where this was, very categorically spelled out. So what are the things one should keep in mind? Then there's also been a complaint about how, Mediclaim is not covering cost of PPEs and, other consumables like masks. So if anyone's renewing their policy now for the next 1 year, what are the things to keep in mind, the add-on covers perhaps to keep in mind?
Sure. So first question, see, domiciliary hospitalization, as I said, is covered typically as standard in most health insurance policies. In fact, it's not even a rider that you have to opt for. It gets covered by default. One of the reasons why none of us have, ever heard about it or, have thought about it is because nobody really ever thought that, there would be a scenario when beds won't be available and we'll have to be treated at home. But actually, if one goes out and looks at their current health insurance policies, most of these policies cover for domiciliary hospitalization. So I think that should come as a relief for a lot of people who think that home treatment is not covered. I will definitely place one note of caution here. please do check for exclusions, as some of the policies, and I'll say some of them, they do exclude some items in domiciliary hospitalization, and it also includes a word called upper respiratory tract infections, which could be COVID as well, which is COVID in fact. So one must check for exclusions that it's not there. But apart from that, domiciliary hospitalization typically is covered in most of the comprehensive health insurance policies. That's part one. Part two, now you mentioned a very important point, PPE kits or consumable items as it's called in a generic terminology. This would typically include PPE kits, cost of gloves, masks, syringes, etc., which get used up during the treatment at a hospital. Now, pre-COVID, when PPE kits weren't really a reality, the cost of consumable items in a medical bill used to be less than 5%. It used to be 2 to 3% of the total bill. And this was never covered in a health insurance policy. However, that amount used to be again very small, so it never really bothered anybody. And as customers, we never really thought too much about it.
Sure.
Now, because of the kind of sanitization that's needed in COVID, what has happened is that the cost of these non-payable items has gone up significantly, and it becomes as much as 15 to 20% of the total bill amount in case somebody is hospitalized. So in such a case, you now actually have options where by opting for a rider, you can actually get these non-payable items covered as well. This would typically cost about 5% of the premium. But with that, your entire bill, so which includes the cost of these PPE kits and all, they also would get covered in your health insurance policy. So as you said, in case you're renewing your policy or if you're buying a new policy, please do make sure that these consumable items are covered in your health insurance policy. If they're not, you can either look to move to a policy which covers them or opt for a rider in case there is one and get that part covered. Because I think going forward, this kind of sanitization is a reality. So getting this kind of a rider will help to ensure that your claim actually goes completely cashless.
Okay, so that's perhaps one add-on cover that you can consider. Harsh, the other thing that I noticed was that, like Amit is saying, I mean, a lot of policies do have the option of domiciliary hospitalization. They come with caps. Your entire sum assured is not what you can claim. You can only claim a fraction of that, and that would defeat the purpose for a lot of people, right? So what are your do's and don'ts? Anybody who's renewing their policy in this environment or buying a fresh policy or porting, what are the most important things they need to keep in mind?
Well, Surbhi, very clearly, whatever has any limitation and restrictions, try and avoid those kind of policies. So you will have an option where a policy covers even the hospitalization expenses, subject to your room rent being 1% of the sum insured, ICU being 2% of the sum insured. So if there is a policy which has none of these sub-restrictions, sub-limits, co-pay, I mean, that is the first thing that you should look at in a policy, and probably take a policy which does not have any such restrictions. Because at the time of claim, you do not want any of these restrictions impacting the total payout to you. So that is the first point. The domiciliary hospitalization home care clause that we're talking about, yes, there could be certain limitations to the extent of 25% of the sum insured, subject to a rupee cap as well. So if there is an option without this kind of an restriction, then of course it's good. Otherwise, this COVID-related treatment that we're talking about, domiciliary hospitalization, this is a one-off case. I mean, this is not a very regular case that a patient cannot be moved to a hospital because the situation being extremely critical, or there are no rooms available at all in the hospital. So this is possible only in case of a pandemic where the larger population is impacted. Otherwise, there is, you do tend to get a room in any of the hospitals or in your vicinity. So yes, this is important. But just make sure there are no restrictions in your policy. There is no harm in paying a slightly higher premium if you can cover yourself with all these kind of possibilities of any restriction. So, and as far as possible, Surbhi, keep the Mediclaim policy as simple as possible. Do not overcomplicate it by adding too many riders. The objective of buying a Mediclaim is simple, that when I get hospitalized, please make the payment promptly and without any deductions, or as less deductions as possible. Now, if you add a critical illness, personal accident riders and all those things, yes, it enhances the cover. But my suggestion, try and keep it as simple as possible without confusion.
Okay, got that. So keep it simple. That's the advice. Before we wind up, Amit, we lost you there. We were discussing this Corona Kavach policy. Since we're in an environment where we're not out of this pandemic, I want to get your take. All of you experts have told us that it's much better to have a comprehensive, Mediclaim policy and not bother much with these Corona-specific products. However, I do hear that with patients where there are comorbidities involved, perhaps some of these products could offer some, some respite. So just tell us who should look at Corona Kavach or Rakshak and who should avoid it and just, go for a standard Mediclaim.
Sure. So let me come to the genesis of how Corona Kavach was born. So last year when COVID had just struck the country, there were a lot of people who were stuck without insurance. And to be very, very honest, people were struggling for money as well. A lot of people had lost jobs, businesses were down, the entire country was in a shutdown mode. In that scenario, I think the one gap which the regulator, the IRDA, saw was that there were a lot of people who were struggling for money, but they wanted health insurance. In such a scenario, the only option available to them at that time was to buy a comprehensive health insurance policy, which a lot of people could not really afford because there was a genuine money constraint at that point of time. So I think that's why the regulator came in and took a very innovative step where they said that every insurance company should launch COVID-specific health insurance policies. The objective was fairly simple. The objective was to offer coverage to the people who cannot afford a comprehensive health insurance policy, to almost offer an immediate solution to COVID, which was needed at that point of time, and people had no money, like a large section of the population had no money. I think, and it really served the purpose as well. A lot of people, specifically the bottom rung of the society, people who were struggling for money, they were able to buy insurance against COVID.
Right.
However, I think now, in terms of finances, in terms of money as well, people are a lot more stable. There are no such constraints. So I would suggest if money is not a constraint, everybody should go for a comprehensive health insurance policy. It will cover you for COVID. It will cover you for everything else as well. In case, however, there is a money constraint, that is when one can look to get the Corona Kavach. And let me quantify this, I think, for everybody. See, a comprehensive health insurance policy of say 10 lakh sum insured would typically cost about 700-800 rupees a month. So it's not a very large expense. So I would say if one can afford 700-800 rupees a month, then go for the comprehensive health insurance policy. If you cannot afford that, then Corona Kavach is a good backup option for you till you can afford a comprehensive health insurance policy.
Okay, got that. So that's the sort of, quick review of some of these standard products as well. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining in, telling us about this important insurance ombudsman order and, of course, the factors to keep in mind if you're looking to renew your health insurance. Thanks very much for the updates. We are completely out of time on this edition of Money, Money, Money. See you again next week.